Hey guys, my name is Erin Kent and welcome to my YouTube channel at Erin Kent Art, and today I'm going to teach you a tutorial on watercolor wildflowers. We're going to paint a simple bouquet of echinacea and lavender flowers. So let's get started. This is the painting we are going to try to recreate together. We have a simple palette of 7 colors, and this is the Master's excuse me, this is the Master's Touch Fine Art Studio watercolor tube paint. This is a very inexpensive paint that you can find at Hobby Lobby, and I believe it costs $10 for an entire set, and I think it comes with 24 colors, so that's a pretty good variety of color. And a very inexpensive way to get started in watercolors if you are looking to do so without breaking the bank. So for our palette, we've got violet, zinc titanium white, viridian hue, sap green, magenta, ripe sienna, and burnt umber. If you don't have these exact colors at home, that's okay. You can do your best to try to match if you're wanting your color palette to be very similar to mine. You can adjust some of your colors if you have a simpler palette at home to try to match. But don't worry if it's not the exact same. It doesn't have to be. Okay, so let's get started with creating our palette. I'm going to put in some violet. Some white. We're going to use this to create a lighter purple for our lavender flowers. This is going to be viridian hue is the stem color for our lavender. Sap green is the stem color for our echinacea. Now, if you're wanting to create your own greens and you just have one simple color of green in your palette, you can add more yellow to get a brighter green like this one, and you can add more blue, a darker blue, to get a kind of more dark green in the teal, sort of in the teal family. And here's magenta. It is the perfect color for echinacea flowers, but it doesn't have to be the only kind of red you can use. This is ripe sienna. This is perfect color for the cone. And burnt umber to provide some shading and darkening of the other colors if we need. Okay, so now what we're going to do is transfer water to our palette. This is a paint that is not intended to be used straight out of the tube. You want to add water to your watercolor paint. This will activate the pigment and create the watercolor style that we are looking for in our painting. As I am transferring water over, I am doing about 2 or 3 transfers of a brush full. This is my number 10 round that I'm using. A larger brush makes this process go a little faster. In watercolor, you will find that the more water you add, the lighter the color will get. So if you're wanting a really light wash or a light tone, you will use more water. And if you're wanting a more saturated, darker color tone, you will use less water. Have a more muddy consistency of your paint. And right now, to mix in my palette, that is my goal, is kind of a muddy consistency with it. So because I'm gonna already plan to add white into my purple, I'm not gonna clean my brush between this mixing. Okay, so we're gonna clean our brush really well, and then we're gonna tap it on our towel to make sure all that pigment is out before you start mixing the next color. And we'll do that each time. And I'm using the edge of this well to try to get as much of that pigment out of my brush before I clean it. Okay, now that our paint is mixed with the water and activated, it's ready to use. So let's talk about how we're going to start. So the first thing I'm planning to paint is the actual cones of your echinacea, and I'm going to try to match this composition with my new painting by placing them around here on the page. And I'm going to try to leave some space up here for this top lavender flower, and then here for this middle flower. To begin, we're going to choose where we want that cone to go. And I'm just kind of creating a blob of a shape with the water. I know it's probably hard to see in the video, but just know that there's a little bit of a puddle here with water. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. And you just want your shape to kind of be wider at the base than at the top. It doesn't have to be perfect, and we can make adjustments as we go. This lower cone, I am doing a smaller, more pointed shape, kind of like I have on this painting over here. I like the variety in size and shape of the actual flowers. Okay, so now we're going to take a wet brush and dip it into our sienna, and then we're going to dab it into our cone blobs. Just let that paint kind of spread and do its thing. And this is a time where you can start adjusting your shape if you want. Smoothing out any edges that are not quite what you like. I've got this flower angled this way, this one this way, and this one also that direction. You can use your brush to mop up or remove any excess liquid or pigment where you're wanting a highlighted area. As you can see, that's what I'm doing now. All right, now I'm using a somewhat dry and somewhat clean brush to do this. Okay. Now we can drop in some of this burnt umber where we would like our shadows to be. So I'm kind of angling the light coming from up above, sort of on the left side of the page. So I'm going to put the shadows opposite of that. And if you paint just at the bottom edge of your shape, it'll start to bleed in. The colors should naturally kind of blend together a little bit. You can drop in some more sienna if you like, where the two colors meet, and you can help in that shading transition. And it may bleed back into the area that you lightened if you took some off, but you just have to keep an eye and go back over with a dry brush if you need to remove more. Okay, so we're gonna let those cones kind of dry for a little bit while we start the lavender flowers. We're gonna have this top one here. We'll start it here and kind of come down to there. And then this center flower we'll have here, start here and come down to here. Okay, and for that, we're gonna switch to number 6 round. I like that it has a smaller point on it, and this brush doesn't hold as much water or paint. So I have a little more control over these smaller flower petals that are gonna go on our lavender. So we're gonna take some of this purple and move it over here. And then get some water. And then we're gonna even clean our brush and add in some white. This will give us a light purple for our first layer. All right, happy with that. So I'm just using the very, not the tip, but like the first 1/4 of an inch of the brush and just gently tapping it down and creating these little shapes that you see in the lavender flower. The lavender buds are going to be kind of closed towards the top and more open towards the bottom, so you're going to have a smaller shapes up top, and then you'll get a little wider as you go down. Again, just kind of stamping my brush with that first 1/4 of an inch of the bristle. At a certain point, you don't want to get any whiter on your lavender, and you just want to stay consistent going down the stem, which I'm trying to do that now. Okay, I'm gonna call that good on that first flower. Maybe put a little more in here. You can go back in and get a little darker in some spaces and create some variation for our first layer. And then we'll go in with our second layer after that has dried. Okay, so this flower, slightly different angle. I'm gonna start it down here below where I think those petals are gonna drop on that top flower. Again, tighter shapes up top, smaller. And you can turn your page to kind of give you different angles to work with. Okay, I think I'm about done with this one. And again, I'm going to go back in and make some of these areas a little darker. Okay. All right, so I am ready to work on the petals for our echinacea flowers. So we're going to switch over to the number 10 round brush. And we are going to get some of the echinacea color, the magenta, over here. And we are going to add more water to lighten that up for our first layer. Okay, so we got some water and pigment in our brush, and I'm going to start with this lower flower. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to start with this flower up here. And feel free to turn your page as you work in your petals to make sure you get your angles the way you like. And you may see some bleeding into your cone. That's okay, we can fix that. If it happens, I'll show you what to do. Feel free to adjust your petal shapes how you like. Okay, and then take a clean, damp brush and you can mop any of that bleeding up that you don't want. And there will be an additional layer we'll add to these cones before we're all done. Okay, now I'm ready to go to my next flower right here. And let's see, little guys over here, off in the background. When I'm painting these flowers, I'm starting with my tip pointed at the tip of the petal, and I'm pressing and I'm lifting once I get close to the center of the flower, the cone. And again, turning the page seems to really make a difference in helping. And if you're like me and you prefer your cone petals to be a little rounded at the tip, you can take your brush and make adjustments on the shapes while it's still damp. Oops, accidentally mixed some sienna in my magenta. That was an accident. So right now I'm just kind of going in and tapping in a little bit more pigment to create some variation in this first layer. Don't want it to be all the same exact tone. Again, I've got some bleeding going on, so I'm going to use my brush to pick that back up. Okay. I've got some more bleeding on this coneflower, and I'm gonna smooth that over the best of my ability. Okay, and then we're gonna do this last little flower and move on to that next step. Okay. Okay, so now we can move on to our stems. We're going to use this Viridian Hue colored green for the stem of the lavender, and we're going to use this lighter green, which, oh my gosh, is starting to mix with that Viridian Hue, and that is going to be our stem color for the echinacea. I think we need to start with the stems for the lavender, since those flowers are somewhat dry. I am thinking, yeah, those lavender stems will kind of come towards the front. Let's see here. We'll take some of our lavender, get some water on our brush to, sorry, lavender, the green for the lavender. And this is the Viridian Hue green. So you want a wet brush. And we're going to kind of add in some of the stem in the gaps. Bring it down here. We'll do a leaf on this stem right here. And one right here. that goes behind that petal. Do a third leaf back here. It's kind of tucked behind. We're going to do this stem, and it's going to run down here. And the leaves. I want to do some of these cross stems that are going to be inside the lavender too. You don't have to fill it in completely, but just a few marks here and there to show those extra stems in there exist. Okay, nice and subtle. And this echinacea stem, instead of how I kept them separate in this painting, what I want to do is it's going to go behind the lavender stems, but it's going to connect somewhere over, well, let's see. Maybe I'll do it down here. Do the stem down here and then connect over to there. Okay. Yeah. So let's do, you know what, I forgot that there's a little bit of extra blooming on this stem over here, and I think we could probably still get away with adding that in. Yeah, let's do that real quick. So I'm gonna add a little purple. I think I'm gonna do it right here. Okay. And now to mix the stem color for the echinacea. Let's pull some of this green out because it's gonna try to mix in with that viridian. Get some extra water in it. Lighten that green up. Okay, let's paint our stems for echinacea. So this one I'm gonna have kind of come down over here. This one will come down here. And we're going to branch behind the lavender stems. Over to this flower. Now we can add in our leaves on our echinacea. I'm going to try to follow the composition over here that I've already laid out. Just slight adjustments. So I'm kind of drawing the outline of the leaf and then filling in. Using a very wet brush and my watered down pigment to do this. So I've got a leaf that I want to go behind all of this stuff, so I'm going to try to do my best to go behind. Again, just filling in carefully. Try not to get too close to your edges because you want to be able to pop this in a frame and not cover up your painting. Okay. Okay, so got our first layer down on everything, and we can start to add our second layer on, let's see, what do we want to start with? Actually, let's go ahead and do a little bit of brown mixed with our green over here and throw that into our wet leaves. I need a little more green. Okay, there we go, I like that. Now we're gonna kind of create some shading on these green wet leaves. Kind of following the same shadow pattern that I chose to do on the cones. Okay, love that. Looks really nice. Okay, so now we can move on to, let's do our second layer on our lavender. We're gonna use the number 6 round for this part, and we're gonna use our darker purple in our palette, kind of as it is. You can get your brush with a little water in it and then tap into that color. We want it to be a pretty dark, saturated second layer. So I'll start up top here, And I'm kind of filling in at the base of what we've already painted to give some shadows within those flowers. You don't have to go back over everything you've painted, but you want to kind of have it consistent throughout the flower. Some shadows added. Throwing in some dots here and there. I like that look. Okay. And then I'm going to move on to the next one. Do the same thing. Keeping the shadows at the bottom right corner of things. Keep some consistency with that, how that light would feel if this were real. Just take a look at them and decide if you are happy. You definitely want to avoid overworking these details or it'll start to get muddy together. Very pleased with how that came out. Oh, forgot this bottom bit down here. Definitely want to define this area. Ooh. Accidentally got some of that green in there. Okay. Okay. Now we can do our second layer on our coneflower petals or echinacea petals. What I'm going to do is take this darker magenta and I'm just going to sparsely add it in where I think some shading or definition is needed in the petals. And I'll start up here. Don't want your brush to be too wet, but wet enough to where you can spread this paint. Any petals that would, be underneath another petal, those are the ones you want to add that darker color to and shade. Give some more definition too. I'm also kind of blending it with my brush. Okay, I'm happy with that, and I'm going to move on to the next flower. Okay, so I'm gonna let that rest and move on to doing another layer on the cone flower, on the actual cone in the echinacea. And I'm gonna leave some of that initial color underneath showing. I'm not gonna cover the whole thing. And then we're going back in with some brown to, again, keep that shadow consistent. If your petals are super wet, you might hold off on this part. Mine are not, so I'm able to go back in with this brown and not worry about bleeding. Gorgeous. Okay, so now the last thing I want to do for sure is get some of this viridian hue, and we're going to mix with a touch of this burnt umber. That got a little too dark, so I'm going to go back in with some of the green. That should be good. And I'm going to switch to a number 6 brush. And we're going to tap in or paint in some shadows on this lavender stem and the leaves. So I'm going to start here. Remember to consider where the lighting is coming from in your composition. And that your shadows are consistent throughout. If you want to blend those in so there's not such a hard line, you can kind of come back with a wet or damp brush, I should say, and smooth those colors together. Or blend, I should say, blend. Okay, I think I might take a little bit of the magenta because I would like a little more variation in the shading on the petals. Try not to mix this too much with water to get that darker shade. Don't forget there's some shadows over here where that cone is, so you would have a little shading there. Okay, and I'm gonna let that be as it is, and we are done with this tutorial. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll subscribe and come back to see more tutorials in the future. Thanks again.